Dear Void, the debate about the possible existence of God is as ancient as the existence of humanity itself. Throughout the ages, there were philosophers who argued back and forth about the concept, its nature, and its relevance to the world and to humanity as a whole. And it was done in different religions and in different times, from different angles. For example, can there actually be a moment of creation, or did the universe always existed just as God always existed? Because if there were a moment of creation, and we say that God always existed, then that would mean that for a limited time God didn't create the universe and then God changed his mind. At some point something happened, something changed, something influenced God, and he made the decision to create the universe. But if that were true, then that betrays the very definition of God. God is supposed to be eternal and perfect. And by the word perfect, what we mean is to say that all of the things that can be already are instilled in him, are part of him. He is the reason of all reasons. By definition, he is limitless and therefore unchanging, not influenced by anything, the Alpha and the Omega. So there cannot be a moment when God changes his mind and decides to make the universe. Therefore, the universe must be eternal like God is. And believe it or not, but that was the view of Muslim philosophers in the golden age of Islam, specifically Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina. They both claim the universe must be eternal as it comes from an eternal source. And that worked well with what Aristotle believed. Now, Aristotle, of course, didn't look at it from a Judeo-Christian Muslim perspective, but his reasoning was later adopted by philosophers of those religions. And what he believed was that motion cannot have a starting point, because everything that moves has a reason for its movement. And if that's true, you end up with infinite regress. Something had to move something, and something else had to move that previous something, and so on, all the way to eternity. You're stuck in a loop, and you create a paradox. Every motion has an instigator, but there wasn't one mover that started it all? Then how did motion start to begin with? Aristotle's solution to that was that motion must be eternal. So there must be an unmovable mover in the root of it all. And Aristotle believed also that the same thing is true for material, because he observed that material changes all the time. Everything changes, shifts, becomes something else. Today we might call that the law of preservation of energy. So where did everything come from? You once again find yourself in that paradox where change is part of the material world, but you find yourself in a loop where there's no instigator to the original change that starts the entire chain. So Aristotle concluded there has to be an original, unchanged changer. Muslim and Jewish philosophers appreciated Aristotle's logic, but of course it also had a lot of objectors. For example, Maimonides, the Jewish philosopher, and for a quick rundown on him, watch this video of mine, link in the description. While he thought both Aristotle and Al-Farabi were fine examples of nearly complete human beings, he argued against that logic. Mainly because if that was the case, then there was no moment of creation, which the entirety of Judaism, in Maimonides' eyes, was based on. Other philosophers like El-Ghazali, a Muslim philosopher, also objected to that idea. He said that the very idea that God cannot freely choose to act at a certain time is an unproved assumption that does not necessarily dent the definition of God as a limitless and perfect reason of all reasons. Now, all of those people I just mentioned lived in ancient times to medieval times. So don't we have newer philosophers with a more modern point of view on these philosophical questions? Well, no, not really. And I believe a big part of it is how the internet dumbed down the conversation. These days, we don't really have philosophical debates anymore. We have echo chambers and people making unfounded claims or misinformed arguments in YouTube videos, and the irony is not lost on me, just to win points with their camp. And it's true for both the theist camp and the atheist camp. Personally, I once again find myself in neither camp. While I present myself as an atheist, and if pressed I usually say effectively an atheist. What I mean by that is that I reject all human religions. But that does not mean that I reject the very possibility of a reason of all reasons. And too often, these two very different topics are conflated. The possible existence and nature of God is a completely different subject to the question, do I believe a man who spoke to a burning bush in the desert led people through the desert for 40 years in a trip that should have taken them like 5 days because God gave him superpowers and the orders to do so? Or if I believe that a Jew was murdered by the Romans and then zombified after 3 days because he is in fact God incarnated? Or do I believe that a merchant went into a cave and met an angel that gave him a new message from God? Or do I believe in a deity shaped like an elephant, for that matter? The answer to all of those is no. I do not believe any of those things. But the concept of the reason of reasons is detached from this or that religion. It's a philosophical concept, and as such can be discussed and analyzed with reason. It doesn't mean that we'll ever get to an agreed upon conclusion. Philosophy is not science. But philosophy is also not mysticism. It's not all opinions are valid. No, not all opinions are valid. You have to have a system. You have to follow logic and reason. Build your arguments in a way that addresses the ideas that you are discussing in a coherent way. You can't just resort to because I say so, or that's my point of view. Or how dare you not agree with that? There's no room for your feelings in philosophy. In fact, if your feelings aren't challenged by something, you're probably doing philosophy wrong. Now, modern science has given us a lot of new information that we should have integrated into the debate to evolve it. But instead, we're stuck with internet trolls or just people who are not trained to think like philosophers, who get a lot of views and push really problematic or just plain wrong arguments. For example, there's a fallacy that both theists and atheists do, each in their own way, but it is the same fallacy exactly. And it's using a term in a way that is not consistent with what the actual definition of that term is. Theists do it when they ask what happened before the Big Bang. Their intention, of course, is to say, okay, even if I believe in the Big Bang, which, by the way, in itself is already misusing the term, the Big Bang is not something for you to believe in. It's a description of reality as it arises from the evidence. But anyway, they say, if I believe in the Big Bang, what happened before it? Now, the thing that they don't seem to understand is that to ask what happened before the Big Bang is like asking what key the melody is before the song was even written. You're mixing terms. See, Einstein told us that time is a dimension of space, which is why we call it space-time. Time is not separated from space. You can't talk about time without talking about space. The same way you can't talk about length without talking about space. Length, not in the context of some given space, is meaningless. It's gibberish. It's what we call in Hebrew bacham, which is a short for meaningless expression. You can't ask what happened before the Big Bang because the Big Bang is the moment space and therefore time began. Before is a term that can only be used within time. If there's no time, there's no before and after. So the question in itself shows a lack of understanding of the terms that they are using, and therefore not only is it not a good point to make, it doesn't move the discussion anywhere. Atheists, they do the same exact thing. Their version of it is, if God created the universe, who created God? And when you say to them that God always existed, they say, oh, well, you're just moving the problem to a different place. No, I'm just using the term as it is meant to be used. The word God means the reason of all reasons. That is the very definition. Limitless, unmoved, uncreated, and cannot not exist. The one source from which all other things emerge. All other things. So by that definition, God cannot have a creator or a reason. Or he, she, it is not God. Now, that doesn't prove the concept exists, it's just a philosophical concept. You can still argue maybe that there's no reason to believe that such a source of sources exists. Great. But when you try to disprove the concept by misrepresenting what the concept is, again, that's not a good argument and it doesn't really drive the conversation forwards. In fact, it ends it in a rut. It's like we're arguing how to design our living room and suddenly someone says, well, the couch should go there because it would sound better. People would be right to say, you don't seem to understand what the word couch means. So my point is that we need to go back to philosophical debates, true philosophical debates. And for that, we need accomplished philosophers, which, thanks to postmodernism, is a very hard thing to find. I won't go into how postmodernism killed philosophy in this video, it's a topic for its own video, but the point is that scientists are not philosophers. They are not trained to think like philosophers. And influencers on YouTube and TikTok or whatever are definitely not philosophers. So everything you get from them is either a repeat of old ideas, most of which have been disproven already, or badly argued nonsense of just a misrepresentation of the terms they claim to debate. So in short, moving forwards, I don't think the internet is the place for high thinking. At least not in its current state.